Hey friends, Pastor Fiebercorn with you for Catechism Monday. Hope you had a good weekend. A little somber for me yesterday, remembering 9/11. I was at the Air Force Academy when that happened, and it was quite the ordeal. Watched some documentaries yesterday, brought back a lot of memories of that time. Anyway, today's a new week, and we've been kind of easing our way into the topic of baptism. Don't know if you watched last week. I realize it was Labor Day, but we talked about God's proclivity for working through visible signs, especially as we see that happening in the Old Testament. And so when we get to the New Testament and he institutes the sacraments of baptism and Lord's Supper as visible signs by which he bestows forgiveness to us, it's not necessarily a new or unique thing. It's the way God's been working. Well, today we're going to talk about how baptism itself was specifically foreshadowed in some Old Testament types. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to go through perhaps the most prominent one. And that is a passage in 1 Peter 3, which specifically connects what happened in Noah's flood with our baptism to come. So it's kind of a foreshadowing. And so here's the verse. I'll get to it here. Says, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh and made alive in the spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison, because they formerly did not obey." Okay, so Peter here is talking about how Jesus died, he rose again, and then he went and proclaimed to some spirits who are in prison. This is when he descends into hell and proclaims victory over Satan. How do we know this is what's going on here? Well, look what comes next. Because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. Okay, so these people whom Christ visits and proclaims to in the descent into hell are those who were in Noah's day, in the days of the ark. And we know that only 8 people were saved. Everybody else perished because of their sin. And that's what it goes on to say, in which a few, in that ark, that is, 8 persons were brought safely through water. So Noah and his family, so Noah and his wife, that's 2, and then the 3 sons and their wives, that's 6 more. 8 people were saved through water. They passed through water on this ark of salvation while everybody else drowned and perished. And when I show pictures of Noah's Ark, I do not like to show ones that have little giraffes' heads sticking out the portals on the side and maybe an elephant on top. Those are the things for kids' nurseries, but they kind of make us treat the ark like a fairy tale. And no wonder grown-ups grow up and don't believe it, because it was always portrayed to them sort of as a children's story. Well, it's no children's story. All of humanity perishes in the flood. And this picture kind of depicts that. There's these people grasping for whatever they can, but we know they'll ultimately drown. But inside that boat, those 8 people are safe. They pass through water into salvation. Now, Peter says baptism, which corresponds to this, kind of relates to this, now saves you. Just like they were saved through the ark, now you're saved through baptism. And he's clear to say, not as the removal of dirt from the body. It's not because baptism somehow washes you clean that you're saved, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Jesus. So how does baptism save you? It saves you through the resurrection of Jesus. See, in Romans, it says when we're baptized, we are killed with Christ, drowned, the old nature is drowned. And just as he was raised, we too are raised to new life. And it's also the promise we'll be raised on the last day. And this idea of being an appeal of good conscience, that's a hard word to translate, but it's kind of like the evidence in court, like Exhibit A, Your Honor, what's the proof? And so you could think about this. Hey, you get to the pearly gates of heaven, so to speak, and someone says, why should I let you in? What's the proof that you're saved? And you say, here's my baptismal certificate. I was baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God claimed me as his own, and that's that. And that's how we see baptism. It's a saving act. And Peter, when he teaches about baptism, reminds us it's kind of like another time in history when God saved people through water. So Old Testament foreshadowed visible means. Old Testament even foreshadows salvation through water. And of course, we have the parting of the Red Sea and the crossing of the Jordan River. And we could go on and on and on. But I just wanted to point your attention to this particular passage because First Peter does such a nice job connecting. Finally, then, I have a baptismal font there. That's a picture of the top of Zion's font. And you notice it has how many sides? 8 sides. Now, this isn't some kind of rule or something, but let's say the majority of baptismal fonts are 8-sided. And the theological significance of that is because it reminds us of this very thing, that 8 people were saved through water in Noah's flood. And so liturgically throughout the ages, there's just been a pattern of making 8-sided baptismal fonts. If you ever see one in a church that's circular or 6-sided or something like that, it's not that that's wrong, but there's just kind of some powerful symbolism going on there. And it's what we have at Zion too. So anyway, now you know. Hey, great to be with you this Catechism Monday. I hope you learned some stuff. We're going to keep walking through the topic of baptism in the weeks ahead. God's peace to you and have a good rest of your week.